right, so one more time, here we are talking about the Fifth Amendment. This is the third in the Fifth Amendment series that I've done for you over this corona, and I'm hoping this is the last one. So in previous videos, what have we talked about? We've talked about a general list of rights that there are in the Fifth Amendment. We talked about jury, double jeopardy, self-incrimination, the limitations on those various things, as well as how they functionally show up in the law and in the police practices, things like Miranda rights and stuff. We also talked about due process and the two different types of due process, procedural versus substantive, how the 14th Amendment incorporates those rights into law for the states. And we talked about eminent domain. We talked a lot about eminent domain in the last video. We talked about what it is, why the lawyers believe, constitutional scholars believe the government has the power of eminent domain, even if it doesn't show up in the Constitution. We talked about how it's used. We talked about what your protections are against it. And then a court case, Kelo versus New London, that radically changed people's understanding of the Fifth Amendment. And then, of course, some just nuanced ideas about how the Fifth Amendment is actually applied today. Talked about the trees across the street from Walmart and about the sewage treatment and taking away value and those kinds of things. So there's your review of the Fifth Amendment, which leaves one last topic for me to discuss, and that is abortion. I don't do abortion in this unit because I specifically want to talk about abortion per se. I just like to use the issue to illustrate how the Fourth Amendment, which we already covered in previous videos, and the Fifth Amendment are sort of in tension with one another at times. And in general, how rights, how one right in the Bill of Rights, like the first, might be in tension with another right, like the fourth, as far as the Supreme Court and how this shows up in our daily life. This also gives me a chance to talk about abortion without dealing with the controversies and getting all angry with each other over the issue itself. So, talking about abortion and the Fourth Amendment. So, how is how's the issue of abortion a Fourth Amendment idea? Well, in general, what we're talking about when we talk about Fourth Amendment is we're talking about privacy. We're talking about privacy of persons. We're talking about privacy in your home, which basically means privacy to use your body the way you wish to use it with your consent, and privacy in your home, and what basically happens in your home is your business. And the Supreme Court basically said abortion, because it's tied to sex and the decisions that people in relationships make with one another, that abortion will fall under this Fourth Amendment idea. If I can expect privacy in my bedroom, then how much more should I expect over my body? The pictures I've got here, this one's pretty illustrative of this idea. My body, my privacy, Fourth Amendment, my choice. This one here actually, though, illustrates one of the radical fringes of the abortion idea. There are many who believe that the birth control pill itself represents a form of abortion because of the way it stops conception from essentially, taking root and, forming an embryo. And because there is the opportunity for, a fertilized egg that then is not allowed to grow because of the pill, then some believe that the birth control pill itself represents an abortion and should be legal or made illegal. But if this is a contraception issue, if this is going to be a privacy issue about how you choose to make decisions about family planning, and what we're talking about is kind of the same issue, although further along both the timetable as well as maybe the seriousness spectrum, depending upon who you are. So that would be the Fourth Amendment. How does it fall under a Fifth Amendment idea? Well, Fifth Amendment, life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Well, in the case of an abortion, if you suggest that the person who is that the embryo, the child that's in the womb is in fact a child, then that child has citizenship rights, and therefore, under the Fifth Amendment, you cannot take from a citizen life, liberty, or property, in this case, obviously, we're talking about life, liberty, or property, without due process of law, which in other words would be like, for example, the embryo having the opportunity to defend itself about why it doesn't deserve to have its life taken from it. Well, that obviously doesn't happen, and so therefore the Fifth Amendment would be the other side of the abortion debate, as the Fifth Amendment suggests that we're violating the equal protection laws, we're violating the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment when we deprive a citizen of life without a trial. And when you think about it from this perspective, what else is the government's job but to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and what represents those who cannot protect themselves more than an unborn fetus, an unborn baby? So there you have it. There we have the basics of Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment, how the same issue can be viewed as each. One essentially saying privacy. If I'm private in my home, then how much more private should I be over my body and the way I use it and choices I make? The other one saying, no, we're talking about a citizen who's being deprived under the Fifth Amendment of life. So the big court case, of course, that we deal with is Roe versus Wade in 1973. And in Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court had to essentially take on the issue of abortion just head on. There was no avoiding the question anymore. Is it a Fourth Amendment right? Is it a Fifth Amendment right? So let's talk about what it did specifically. First off, Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Fourth Amendment, or in favor of the rights of the mother to choose. In other words, made abortion legal. But by doing so, the Supreme Court essentially recognized that, hey, pregnancy is a different story, because, unless you're an absolutist, it's hard to ignore the idea that a pregnancy on day one looks a lot different than a pregnancy, right before birth. And, when does it change? I don't know. It's a gradual process that occurs over the course of 9 months. And so when does, what is the nature of pregnancy? And so in order to answer that question, Roe versus Wade essentially divided pregnancy into 3 periods of time. During that first period, the Supreme Court said, look, we're going to treat abortion as a Fourth Amendment right. Already talked about why. As a Fourth Amendment privacy right, security of person, security of home, those kinds of things. And by deciding that abortion was going to be covered by the Fourth Amendment during this period, they essentially made abortion universally legal. Meaning, what I mean by that is that at some point in the pregnancy, the right to an abortion is the national law. So that's that during that first period of time. During the third period of time, and yeah, I know I skipped 2, but during the third period of time, the Supreme Court looks at the pregnancy and says, wait a second, now, what used to be a bundle of cells back on week, 3 is now something that acts and looks like a citizen, and probably might even be able to survive outside the womb on its own. And if it can do that, then we have to consider that might be a citizen, an American with rights. And if that's the case, then the Fifth Amendment due process protections take over. All right, so here we've got this problem. On one hand, we've got this idea that the Fourth Amendment is going to take precedence during certain times of the pregnancy. On the other hand, the Fifth Amendment is going to take precedence. But what do we do about the middle period? When does it go from first to third and such? And for that, we're going to talk about this middle second period. Now you can see I forgot to mention some notes here, so just real quickly, during this third period, there's the statement that can't have life removed from it without due process, as we talked about. And this also means, though, that each state will be able to say, okay, in our state, we do not want an abortion. We believe that an abortion at X period of time, during X month or during certain conditions, would be wrong. It would be a violation of the Fifth Amendment, and therefore we're going to create laws to limit the who can have an abortion and why they can have abortion during this stage. Now that's going to vary from state to state, And it also leaves open the idea that the second period of time is going to be, kind of fluid. Like, when does the first period end? When does the third period begin? And how big is this second period of time in between? And what are the rules going to be? And the answer essentially is that the states are going to decide. So here's the solution to the problem with what to do about when does the first period, Fourth Amendment rights cease and the third period, Fifth Amendment rights begin. The solution is we're going to let each state choose when the periods begin and end. So some states are going to pick a date very early in the pregnancy, and others are going to choose a date very late in the pregnancy. Some might not even choose to have a date. They're just going to say the first period goes to the very, very end. And so each state is going to choose. Each state is also going to choose what kinds of restrictions can be placed during those time periods. So whether during period 2 you can have an abortion electively, meaning just because you want to, or whether it has to be for medical reasons. The problems, of course, are going to come with that this is attempting to be a compromise, right? We're attempting to say, look, we recognize that you people who think it's privacy, that's true. And we also recognize that you people who think it's a life, that's true. But, of course, what happens every time you make a compromise? No one's happy, everyone's angry, and so therefore we just, we have all these fights. So the pro-life side, those who believe that abortion should always be a Fifth Amendment right, they're going to be angry because they look at period 1 and they're going to see that the Supreme Court believes it's a Fourth Amendment issue, and they're going to be angry because what that means is that abortion is guaranteed at some point of the pregnancy. Depending upon the state, that might be the first couple of weeks, or it might be the first couple of months, or it might even be longer. The pro-choice side, they're going to be angry because they look at this as sort of this third period thing as a time when choice is denied. That my pregnancy is my pregnancy, and therefore for you to tell me that I can't have an abortion at a certain time is a violation of my rights. And in some states, those times might be very early in the pregnancy and therefore very restrictive. So both sides are going to be angry. This last slide, and this is it. This last slide kind of illustrates the problem. So this is an old map. It's probably been updated several times since I captured it. All have different definitions of when does this first period end and when do the other periods where they start putting restrictions begin. And you can see that at the time of this map being published, some states like North Dakota and Arkansas, that these states have very, very early dates in the pregnancy, 6 weeks into the pregnancy. And that after 6 weeks, the state says, no, you can't have an abortion. So they're following Roe versus Wade because they're seeing abortion inside that 6 weeks. But, they after 6 weeks, they're restricting it heavily or even outlawing it. And many people would look at this and say, well, wait a second, 6 weeks, a lot of people don't even know they're pregnant in 6 weeks. They've missed only their first period or something like that, and they're not even thinking about being pregnant. They're not tested yet. And by the time they realize they're pregnant, the 6 weeks has already passed, and now it's too late. And so by putting it, you've actually functionally, if not literally, you functionally made it illegal. But you can see that the other states have other dates. Montana's is viability, meaning essentially when the fetus is able to live outside the womb. Well, that's even problematic because, with better technologies, what do you mean by outside the womb? Do you mean in intensive care? Do you mean just on its own? Do you mean in an artificial womb that they're developing these days? So what do you mean by viability, and when is that? And then you can see that there's a number of other moments throughout the pregnancy restricting abortion at that point. And then you can see there's other states that have no restrictions at all. And so, basically you can see that how each state has its own definition of when that first period ends and the other periods begin. All right, so hopefully I explained abortion fairly well so that I didn't, start a flame war with people. I don't want people getting angry at each other. I just wanted you to see how Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment are sort of in tension with one another. And next video will be about the Sixth Amendment.